Today begins with the succubus girl Abedo lying sprawled on the ground. Her face flushed red and her breathing labored after Lin Tian's intense interrogation. Lin Tian casually pulled up his pants and mocked her, saying that he honestly never expected a succubus like her to have remained pure. Abedo could only mumble an explanation that nothing could ever have happened between her and Lord Veronica. So it was only natural that she was still untouched. Putting that matter aside, Lin Tian returned to his main objective. He directly asked Abedo whether she could now reveal any information about the black goat egg. Abedo looked at Lin Tian with a mixture of fear and submission. Then revealed that, if she remembered correctly, the thing he was looking for was currently in the hands of the Magic Kingdom. Hearing this, Lin Tian fell into deep thought. He calculated that the Magic Kingdom had hundreds of millions of inhabitants. If that young creature were allowed to freely devour everything and continuously evolve, it might eventually become a demigod goblin unlike anything ever seen in history. A calculating smile appeared on his lips. Lin Tian told himself that he had to find an opportunity to capture and tame it before it matured. That would undoubtedly become a trump card he could use against the other super empires. Immediately afterward, Lin Tian mounted the fire dragon, also known as Xiao Huan, and soared over the mountain ranges, heading straight toward human territory. Before long, the majestic red dragon descended into a dense forest, only a dozen or so miles from the border of the War Empire. Lin Tian gently patted Xiao Huan on the head and told it that this was far enough. The War Empire's border lay just ahead, and if Xiao Huan continued following him, it would easily be discovered, so he told it to return first. Once he finished his business, he had his own way of getting back. Although Xiao Huan was worried, it reminded Lin Tian to be careful before obediently spreading its wings and flying away. Lin Tian simply smiled and waved goodbye with an utterly confident expression. At this moment, Lin Tian was still in his true goblin form. He secretly thought that if he wanted to enter the city and successfully infiltrate the dragon-slaying guild, he would definitely need to find a corpse to use as a substitute identity. Just as he finished speaking, a terrified scream suddenly rang out from the distance. "Goblin! There's a goblin over there!" Two adventurers appeared. One of them asked in surprise whether this area was suffering from a goblin infestation as well. The other laughed excitedly, saying that goblins were pathetically weak, so he might as well kill it and take it back to show off. Maybe the girls in the village would be falling all over themselves for him. Hearing those contemptuous words, Lin Tian merely curled his lips into a mocking smirk before coldly attacking. The result was exactly as expected. In the blink of an eye, the two unfortunate adventurers were sprawled motionless on the ground, surrounded by pools of blood. Lin Tian looked at the corpse beneath his feet, his eyes glowing red. He muttered that he had been racking his brain over where to find a suitable substitute. Yet these fools had conveniently brought him a corpse at exactly the right time. A while later, in the heart of the War Empire, the streets were incredibly bustling. Ancient-style buildings stood closely packed together, while horse-drawn carriages constantly passed through the streets. Lin Tian, now disguised as the long-haired adventurer, casually walked along while chewing on a skewer of grilled meat. He secretly marveled at how prosperous the inside of this empire actually was. Walking through these streets filled with the sounds of people and the hustle and bustle made his blood stir with excitement. He secretly thought that if only he had some money, he would love to splurge for once. Surely he couldn't keep robbing people forever. He stopped in front of an intricately carved iron gate. This was the headquarters of the dragon-slaying guild. Without hesitation, he raised his fist and repeatedly pounded on the iron gate, producing a series of dry bang, bang sounds, but the only response was silence. No one came to open the door, and no one answered him either. Lin Tian scratched his chin and muttered that perhaps it was still too early, and everyone inside was still asleep. After waiting for a long time without seeing anyone, he decided to bend his knees and leap over the iron gate to get inside quickly. He approached the massive main door, which was decorated with a dragon head relief, and heard noisy sounds coming from inside. Lin Tian did not knock on the door. Instead, he peered through the crack and looked inside. It turned out that the guild hall was extremely lively. The adventurers were busy drinking, constantly challenging one another to drinking contests and shouting at the top of their lungs. No wonder no one had heard him knocking earlier. Lin Tian secretly made a plan. In a moment, He would bang on the door as hard as possible to attract everyone's attention. Then use the excuse of coming to register as a new member so he could smoothly sneak inside. But just as Lin Tian was about to turn around, a massive shadow had appeared directly behind him without him noticing. A bone-chilling sensation ran down his spine. Lin Tian spun around in shock, an unmistakable look of horror appearing on his face. Standing before him was a huge woman, as tall and massive as a mountain. She was bending down and staring at him with an overwhelming sense of pressure. An information panel immediately appeared, confirming her identity: Elizabeth Tyrell, a female Titan warrior known by the nickname the Embodiment of Violence. Her total combat power reached an astonishing 10,999, making the very air around them feel heavy. Cold sweat began streaming down Lin Tian's face. He realized in horror that this was one-eyed Cyclops Elizabeth, the legendary guild master of the Dragon Slaying Guild, whose power far surpassed anything he could have imagined. Elizabeth caught Lin Tian sneaking into the headquarters. She demanded in a stern voice to know who had dared to bang on the door so loudly so early in the morning, and then brazenly break into someone else's home. Lin Tian immediately changed his attitude, clasped his hands together, and humbly apologized. He pretended to be a die-hard fan, claiming that he was simply too much of an admirer and wanted to join the Dragon Slaying Guild so badly that he had recklessly gone this far. Elizabeth stepped closer and stared at Lin Tian suspiciously. In an annoyed tone, she asked who exactly he thought he was calling Elizabeth, then scolded him for being so blind despite having eyes. Lin Tian turned pale with fear, but his mouth remained quick-witted. He repeatedly swore that he was simply too impressed by her heroic bearing and had been unable to control himself, which was why he had entered. Hearing all those flattering words, Elizabeth was delighted. She laughed heartily and said that she actually liked hearing that. But the very next moment, her voice suddenly dropped into a dangerous tone. She leaned close to Lin Tian's ear and coldly warned him that since he had dared to sneak into someone else's home, he had better be prepared to receive a lesson he would never forget. Lin Tian could only force an awkward smile as cold sweat poured down his face. The pressure radiating from Elizabeth was so overwhelming that he did not dare say another word. Elizabeth spun around and shouted at her subordinates, calling them a bunch of useless idiots. She scolded them for seeing her completely drunk and still not knowing enough to find someone to help carry her back to bed. Inside, a man who was guzzling wine was stopped by Elizabeth. She muttered that she had almost ended up sleeping in the ditch outside the front door all night. Elizabeth turned toward Gregory and asked whether he was planning to rebel while she was away from home for a night. Gregory hurriedly defended himself, reminding her of the last time he had gotten drunk and she had stripped him completely, tied him up in the middle of the street, and left him there. The humiliation had truly felt worse than death itself. Elizabeth brushed him off, saying that it had been his punishment for being too arrogant, so she had to teach him a proper lesson. With that, Elizabeth launched a thunderous kick, sending the gigantic man flying out of the main hall amid his ear-piercing screams. Witnessing this scene, Lin Tian was completely speechless. He secretly thought that the people of the War Empire were not only insanely addicted to alcohol, but their ways of punishing each other were just as bizarre. Elizabeth climbed onto the drinking table and loudly challenged the entire guild, asking if anyone dared to fight her today. She mocked her subordinates for being unable to beat her and even being unable to hold their liquor, calling them a bunch of useless fools. At that moment, Lin Tian loudly accepted the challenge. The entire guild immediately joined in on the fun. Cheers and the sounds of people drinking echoed throughout the main hall, turning the place into complete chaos. One of the members noticed how enthusiastic Lin Tian was and approached him with a warning. He told him that if he already knew he could not outdrink them, he should not rush in headfirst, because the punishment for losing was terrifying. But if he won, the rewards were enormous. He could become the guild master, ask Elizabeth to do something for him, and might even be able to marry her. He might as well try his luck, who knew? Maybe he would actually win. Hearing that, Lin Tian broke into a meaningful smile. So the Dragon Slaying Guild actually had rules this interesting. Elizabeth ordered them to drag away one of the men who had just lost, strip him completely naked, and hang him from the ceiling to dry. Lin Tian stepped forward with complete confidence and openly said that he wanted to have a drinking match with her. The surrounding members stared at one another in confusion, asking who he was, how he had managed to sneak in, and then moved to drag him outside. Elizabeth curled her lips into a challenging smile. She could not believe he still had not left. She declared that she would drink until he collapsed under the table, and then slowly punish him afterward. The guild members immediately gathered around the drinking table, curiously asking Elizabeth how she planned to deal with the kid later. She lifted Lin Tian's chin, carefully examined his face, and remarked that he looked so fair and innocent, almost as if he had never been initiated into the ways of the world. Elizabeth burst into loud laughter and suggested that perhaps they should take him and give him to an old widow wandering around the street corner so she could have some fun with him. The entire guild immediately erupted into delighted laughter. Lin Tian remained completely unfazed. He smiled and told her not to speak too soon. What if she ended up being the first one to collapse? Elizabeth reminded him that if she lost, she would simply follow the rules. He could become the guild master, make her do something for him, or even take her as his wife. Having said that, she challenged Lin Tian and asked whether he actually dared to compete. The battle officially began. Lin Tian excitedly asked whether she wanted to play rock paper scissors or roll dice to decide who had to drink first. 4 hours passed. By now, Elizabeth had her face buried in a barrel of wine, vomiting uncontrollably. The surrounding members were all horrified, unable to believe that someone could actually drink against Elizabeth for this long. Everyone had begun to wonder about Lin Tian's true background. Lin Tian was still perfectly sober. He slapped the table and urged Elizabeth to regain the spirit she had shown earlier. Between bouts of vomiting, Elizabeth muttered that he was far more impressive than all the men in the guild. Oxius, the third-ranked member of the guild, was forced to step in and stop them. He said that they had drunk enough for today because the guild's entire supply of alcohol had nearly been emptied by the two of them. Even though Elizabeth was completely drunk, she still refused to admit defeat. She waved her hand and shouted at her subordinates to immediately go buy more alcohol. But the moment she finished speaking, she collapsed onto the floor. Her arms and legs flailed helplessly as the drunkenness finally reached its peak. Oxius rushed over in panic to catch her, repeatedly calling Elizabeth's name and asking if she was okay. The entire guild also gathered around her anxiously. The drunkenness finally hit her all at once, completely beyond her control. Elizabeth vomited a rainbow-colored mess right in the middle of the hall. A while later, Elizabeth lay sprawled out on the sofa, resting after the horrifying drinking match. She woke up, her head still spinning. She asked in confusion what had happened, because she clearly remembered that the two of them had still been drinking earlier. Oxius explained that she had lost the drinking contest. Meanwhile, Lin Tian was surrounded by the guild members, who were cheering for him like a hero. Elizabeth looked at Lin Tian and smiled, admitting that this kid was far more impressive than she had expected. She stood up and declared that although she could not match him in drinking, her strength was another matter. She decided to take Lin Tian to see her museum of achievements. Lin Tian looked confused and asked where she was taking him. Their destination was a museum located on the rooftop of a magnificent castle beneath the moonlight. Lin Tian was stunned by the enormous dragon skeletons. He realized that all of them were level 12 magical beasts that Elizabeth had hunted by herself. No wonder the dragon-slaying guild was able to maintain such an independent position. Elizabeth pointed at a glowing purple crystal and recounted how she had defeated the crystal dragon all by herself 9 years ago, even after it tore one of her eyes apart with its claws. She had still risked her life to dig out this core dragon crystal. She draped an arm over Lin Tian's shoulder, wearing an extremely confident expression, and said that if she fought it now, she could finish off that dragon in just a few moves. Then she asked if he believed her. Lin Tian nodded repeatedly, but inside, he was already calculating. This was exactly what Xiao He needed to revive the purple gold dragon mother, so he absolutely had to obtain it. Lin Tian smiled and said that this item probably wasn't very useful to her anymore. Then he tentatively asked whether she could give it to him as a keepsake. Elizabeth immediately refused without hesitation. Her gaze turned cold and sharp, making it obvious that this priceless treasure was something she absolutely could not hand over to Lin Tian. Thank you all for supporting my video. I wish you endless happiness and joy in life. If you enjoyed the video, please give me a like and leave a comment to show your support. I sincerely appreciate it.